That being said, we are broadcasting and for online audience, the chair.
This is a planning board meeting of March 5th, 2025. We'll start with roll call. Brian Balcom here. Jen Bluestein.
And Jack as well. You're both there? Jack
Sorry,
and,
guys. I'm here. It's Jen Bluestein.
Alden Clark here. Charlie Palmisano present. Amy Pennington is not here. Rick Painter here. You're Jack McCarron.
Jack, are you with us?
He's off on mute.
Yeah, Jack is here. Can you hear me?
Thank you. And Matt Hefner here. We have a public hearing tonight. PHCR Incorporated related to 570, 572 Merrimack Street. A representative of the applicant would like to come forward and make the presentation. We're happy to hear what you have.
Great, thank you. My name is Jeff Roloff. I'm the attorney for the applicant. I'm here tonight with most of the project team. We're missing our landscape designer, but the others are here. They'll introduce themselves as they come up tonight. We've listed them on the first slide that you see up on the screen here. If it's okay, I am going to work from these slides. I'll start with an introduction to the project site, get you oriented to the larger development site, and then the portion that's the subject of the two applications before you. Give you a few images of the existing conditions, introduce you to the project, and then I'm going to turn it over to Steve Sawyer, civil engineer with Millennium. He'll go through some of the plan details, and then turn it over to the architectural modern heritage representative to go through the building designs, quickly the landscaping, and then we'll turn it over to the board for questions. Next slide, please. So existing conditions. These properties are right at the roundabout, Spofford Street, Merrimack Street. The properties extend, the larger development area extends from 5 Spofford Street around the corner to 572 and 570 Merrimack Street, as you can see on that left slide there. The blue boundary is the overall development boundary. The existing conditions, and the right is the same, different aerial image, but same area. Currently, you have 5 lots out there, residential lots, 4 homes, two of which haven't been occupied for 20 plus years, and a number of different accessory structures. The project entails the creation of 5 new lots, reconfigured lots, and proposed construction of 5 single-family homes. All of the existing structures, except 2 of the sheds, are going to be demolished. The applicant has already been in front of the Historic Commission, got the 1-year delay, and that expires this spring. The only 2 structures to remain are a very small shed along the riverfront there. That's the Merrimack River to the north. And there's a shed in the middle of the site that they're going to relocate and reuse over this area, which is on the site plans. Next slide, please. So this is just the plan that your package. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but it does show the grades of the site, and you can see from the grades that basically from the roundabout, there's a grade. The property basically goes downhill to the river, as you would expect. This shows the existing buildings in more detail on some of the structures, but I'm not gonna go into that right now. You do have that in your plan set. Next slide. Just a few images that I grabbed today from Street View on Google. So this top left corner is a view from the roundabout, looking back towards the east up Merrimack Street. So existing conditions. This image is from in front of the 570 Merrimack Street property, looking back towards the roundabout. And then this is a direct straight on view of that currently at 570 Merrimack. So the project boundaries are just to the right of the existing driveway there. This house will come down, all these buildings will come down. That's 572 Merrimack there. So this is the area, this is the portion of the larger development site that's the subject of our pending applications, and I'll get into that in a second. Next slide, Amy. So the starting point for the overall development is to create 3 A&R lots along Spofford Street and around the corner. So those are labeled in our application materials, lot 1, lot 2, and lot 3. Those lots are not part of the applications that are in front of you today. We'll deal with the A&R plan separately. But it was important, I thought, to show that plan because it's this lot 4, which can be established by way of the A&R process. So all of these 4 lots would be 100% compliant lots that could be approved and built as single-family homes just through the A&R approval process. Lot 4 in blue is the subject of the applications that are in front of you. Next slide, Andy. So within lot 4, and this is the only front portion of it, what we're proposing is to extend a court on this sort of western area of the site in the vicinity of that existing driveway that I showed you, 570 Merrimack Street, and then 2 lots that we're labeling lot 4A and lot 4B. Within, and all 3 of these features are then within the lot 4 that I showed you in that previous A&R plan. So the applications in front of you are number 1, an application for a special permit for the court and lane, Rogers Court, and a definitive subdivision plan also related to the court and the creation of these 2 lots, both of which will have frontage on Rogers Court. I have the zoning matrix there. The lots are compliant. I'm not going to go through it, but I wanted to include it in case you had questions about any of the dimensions. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Sawyer to get into the details of the court. So again, the focus of the applications are the design of the court that's proposed, Rogers Court, and the configuration of the 2 lots off of that court with the utilities, et cetera. With that, I'll turn it over to Steve. Steve, I'll leave the light.
Good evening, Steve Sawyer with Millennium Engineering. So this application, the courts and lanes, we're constructing a new court to create frontage for lots 4A and lot 4B. The okay. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so we're creating this court. It's going to be a 250-foot long private court. It's designed per the definitive subdivision regulations and zoning regulations. It's required to be 30 feet in width as far as a private right-of-way, 20 feet in width of pavement, with a turnaround suitable for fire apparatus to turn to make the turn and back and turn around. This one is actually, I did a very similar one. I think it's called Donahue Court off of Toppins. It's pretty much the same alignment as that lot with 2, almost exactly the same, with a lot off the left side and a lot off the rear. Very similar in orientation. You'll notice that there's a turnaround at the end. That turnaround isn't intended for a fire truck. It's just intended for use of lot 4B as a rounded driveway for ease of entering and exiting the property. One item of note, I don't think we received any comments from the fire chief on this, Lieutenant Fire Chief, but the applicant, he has met with the fire chief and reviewed the plan, and they're okay. Verbally, he said he was fine with the layout of the roadway. So actually, we jump to the next slide. Okay, actually, this just zooms in, gives a little clearer view of the roadway, 20-foot wide road. The turnaround sort of incorporated. We incorporated the turnaround into, or the hammerhead into the turnaround, just it blends together, a little more visually appealing. The landscape architect came up with that configuration to sort of just improve the visual appearance of that driveway and ease of use of the driveway. We have a half round or a turnaround, background driveway here with the garage entry at that location. One item, as far as the comments that came back from the city, typically with a roadway, you carry the pavement through into this is all pavement and flush. And what the DPW has asked, DPS has asked, is that we provide continue the sidewalk through and do it as a drive apron. So this will be updated. We have no issue with that. It'll be updated, so this will be a concrete sidewalk with a concrete apron. So the sidewalk will run across the entry flush with two homes. It makes sense to provide an easier pedestrian access. And given the light traffic and light use, there's no issue with providing that modification to the entry. And so both of these lots here are conforming. They meet all of the regulations, lot width, area, frontage. The frontage for lot 4A is pulled off, the main frontage is pulled off of the new court. And then the frontage for lot 4B is this part of the private way that wraps in this manner to get your required frontage along that lot. I think we can jump to the next slide. All right, so this is the utility split. So as far as stormwater, one thing on grading, the road does, we slope down at about 3%, some 3% leveling area up at the road. Then we start diving down at 6% for the main part of the road, which is allowed in the regulations. The grade does fall away. We do fall pretty close to the grade until we get to about this point. At about this point, the natural grade falls away fairly abruptly. So we do have to fill, particularly in this corner here, there's a fair amount of filling. You can see there's a fill slope here. So this is all to provide access, vehicle access into the garage. We do have, it's about at 9, I think 9 or the maximum fill is about 9 or 10 feet at this corner. And then it slopes up to about 3 feet across on this side here. So we do have a fill area here to make this all work. There is a small wall here. This wall here is the entire length is less than 4 feet. So it's basically a landscape wall just to hold back a little bit of soil there to bring the grade up. One thing I did do on this to where our right of way is up against this abutter to the east is I shifted the actual pavement, shifted it to the left, or to the west, to this side, to give a larger buffer between to the adjacent property, so there can be enhanced planting there. As far as the grading and as far as the drainage on this, what I've done is I've super elevated, directed the water to the left curb line or to the left edge of pavement. And then along this edge, I've done it's a stone diaphragm trench. It's basically, it'll be about 2 feet of river run stone. There's a pipe where the water will trickle off the road into that pipe. And then it's conveyed to a little area drain here. And then I do have a water quality unit. And then in this location here, there's 2 large concrete chambers, subsurface chambers. And that's where all the stormwater from this driveway and the road here, this driveway, and everything's collected. We have a small catch basin here, small catch basin here, and then this area here is collected in this location. So we've controlled and collected all of the paved surfaces here, and it's all conveyed from this catch basin, this catch basin to a water quality unit where it's pre-treated, and then we convey it into a large underground infiltration chamber system. With that, we provide the water quality volume and the recharge volume required for all of the paved areas. One thing of note of this site, we don't have to meet peak runoff rate, reduce or control the peak runoff rate here, because the receiving waters are tidally influenced. If you're discharging to a tidal area, it's called standard 2 of the DEP regs. You don't need to meet that. So what we do need to meet though is the water quality and groundwater recharge. recharge volume. And I think there was a comment, I think Andy, there was a comment about trying to utilize permeable pavement. This is a little steep. Typically, the regulations say if it's over 5%, they don't recommend permeable pavement just because the water has too much velocity to permeate it through the pavement. I typically don't use that unless it's kind of the last resort. If you have poor soils, high groundwater. I did use it, I think it was a project, it was the old car auto body or the old car lot down near River's Edge. We did condos there, and there we had very poor soils, high groundwater, and no place to treat stormwater, so we did it, and it was pancake flat. So it did work at that application. This application, not so much. I prefer to do standard type collection, catch basin, deep sumps, and water quality units to a large, robust chamber. Easier to maintain, much longer longevity. And the other problem is if you do use permeable pavements, if they do end up patching the pavement or doing any work, it's a specialized process, specialized pavement. So it's a much more simpler approach here. It definitely works with the topography where we're not actually excavating, instead of filling, you're putting chambers in. So instead of requiring so many cubic yards of fill, we just put a couple large chambers in to take up that space and use it as stormwater treatment. So that's the nuts and bolts of the stormwater here. Each of the homes, for the homes, we'll be utilizing just standard dry wells. For the homes, the roof runoff is clean, so we have, I think in this area here, there are 4x4 chambers at this corner here. And so we direct any of the pavement, any of the hard surface here around the pool. There's a small stone collection trench. And then as far as the downspouts, they'd be piped to this location. Those are sized for what they call the recharge volume. So what we need to do for those is hold 0.6 inches over the all new impervious area, which these meet. Same for this house and the pool patio here. We have a gang of chambers here where all the stormwater from the hardened surfaces here are directed to that location. One item of note is that this could be considered a redevelopment project, and there is a lot of impervious surfaces here, a lot of pavement, a bunch of buildings. And one item of note, I didn't take credit for that for the recharge volume. This is considered where we're ripping up and providing new. We consider it a new project, so we're fully complying with any DEP stormwater regulations. Now there was some, a little bit confusion. I think one of the comments from the city engineer was saying, "Why are you doing all this? You don't need to." But what happens is when you look at this project in its entirety, we have 5 lots. So with 5 lots, it triggers DEP stormwater review or stormwater mitigation measures. So we've included it as part of the design. And we think it's important to, particularly for water quality and recharge, it makes sense to take care of that. As far as the water service, one item is we have a new water main that runs down, and we end up with a hydrant. We installed a hydrant at the end of the court, and we have a water service that's pulled off of that in that direction. And originally I had the water service kind of pulled off and serpentine, or pulled off and then bend it into the new home. The DPS, who's it, John Kerry, I think the DPS, there was a comment from him regarding that location. And in a discussion with him, I'm just gonna pull it off and go straight into the building. The main reason I pulled it from the end here was for water quality issues. The 6-inch pipe is a little large. I think John Eric White had mentioned about, hey, you really need a 6-inch main. And the main reason, 6-inch main, it's the minimum for the fire hydrant. So we needed to bring the 6-inch main down for the hydrant. And it made sense to pull the services off of that at the very end. So you have continuous flow through that 6-inch main for water quality issues. You don't want stagnant water in that pipe. But we still have one service here, and then the other service is going to be down pretty close to the end. So we will have I'm just sliding it back a bit, and I don't think there's concern with any water quality of stagnation water in that 6-inch main. As far as sewer for the homes, this will need to be pumped. There's a small pump station here, so it'll come up gravity, be a small lift station. And then what we're doing, instead of running it into the road and out, this is gonna be a common service here for this home, so that when this home is built, it'll pop into this manhole. So we'll just, and this home here flows by gravity to this manhole, and then we're gonna tie in to the sewer across the street. It's in its same general location now. There's an existing, with the existing home down lower, I think it's a 3 or 4 inch. They actually pump the sewer up to this location now. So we'll be pulling that, we'll be abandoning that 4-inch and putting in a new 6-inch gravity across Merrimack Street. So I think that covers everything. And then as far as there is, as I mentioned before, this is a fill slope here. This will be landscape. The landscape architect has taken a careful consideration. This is going to be sort of a riverfront restoration area. We'll be going before the Conservation Commission, I believe, March 18th. And with that, we'll be looking at the project in its entirety regarding the planting and stormwater and landscaping. So that is that. And if I guess, one thing of note is there is a city drain that runs through the property here. So this drain was installed as part of the roundabout project. Originally, there was a drain, you can kind of see, here you go, you can kind of see it faded back. Originally, the city ran the drainage from the Merrimack Street right through the center of the property. And as part of this, the roundabout, they rerouted the drainage to come down this edge of the property, is not to impact to reduce the impact and the encumbrance of that drain on the property. So our roadway's on top of that, which is no issue. Actually, it provides easier access. There's an existing manhole here, and the drain does a kind of a strange thing, goes out and comes out here and then bends down and discharges here. One thing we are doing is at this bend, we're going to be installing a manhole at the bend, which is typically what you do at a bend in a large drain, particularly this large, it's 24-inch, I believe. And then the overflow, instead of providing a new discharge point to the wetland, the overflow from this is just gonna tie into that manhole and then discharge to the existing city drain. And I think that covers everything as far as the technical and civil engineering. I think I'm gonna pass it off.
Good evening, Ian with Modern Heritage, and we represent the build and design portion of the project. So just kind of wanted to introduce you guys to what our thought process was going into the design, the considerations that we gave to the site, to the riverfront location. So we thought we put a lot of emphasis on the orientation of the structures, on the lots, so that it would maximize the aesthetics, as well as really kind of keep the view corridors open to the river as much as possible, and work well with the way the lots are divided. This drawing here represents building on lot 4A. The top elevation that you're looking at, that will be the road facing elevation. We try to keep it as narrow and aesthetically pleasing as possible. And then we did the long portion of the house running parallel to the proposed new court. The bottom elevation is the back elevation, which would face lot 3. And then do you mind next slide, please? So this is going to be the top elevation is the river facing. So that has, that would walk out to the stone patio and have a porch coming off the great room, and off the back there would be a porch as well. The bottom elevation would be the front entrance of the house facing the court. with a little roundabout, right in front of the door, and then the main parking area over, by the garage. And again, you know, we really, all of us are very local, and, we took a lot of emphasis on, New England design and elements, and we really try to incorporate some of these into the building, also keeping budget in mind. But, you know, we really feel that this is a good representation of, Newburyport and, kind of surrounding community. Go to the next slide. This is lot 4B. So this design, we really worked hard to try to keep it as low profile as possible. This is built into the grade, because as it was mentioned before, the grade is sloping down. So we wanted the front facing to be as low as possible. So that's what you see on the bottom elevation is the elevation that would be facing the road. So it is on angle, the garage would be slightly on angle, but as you come down the court, this is what you would see. The top elevation is just the backside, or one of the side elevations, which would be facing the fence line with the abutters off Spofford Street. Next slide, please. So these are the other two elevations. The top elevation is the one facing, it would be southwest. And the bottom elevation is the river facing. So as you can see, the grade slopes down quite a bit there. And so that the back, we really try to push it into the grade as much as possible. Next slide. So this, we wanted to give you guys an idea of the project as a whole. We worked with Elise, our landscape architect. We know that there's the importance of the indigenous species and maintaining the riverfront, the local species, and trying to keep everything as localized as possible. It's important to note that we've been working with environmental consultants as well to talk about drainage, you know, the natural ability of the plants, and really work with trying to incorporate it to restore the riverfront. Next slide. So again, this is jumping into what the proposal is here with you guys today. This is lots 4A and 4B, and this is really kind of honing in on the specifics. The landscape, you know, has been presented, and we'll go through the Conservation Commission to talk about more details. But we have gone through extensively to try to present, you know, as much as possible, keeping the indigenous species. And then the way it's being approached is there's 4 areas. There's going to be the street facing plantings. There's going to be the driveway plantings. Then there'll be the restoration area, and then the residential plantings. And each one has details and the plant proposals for each area. And then, yep, thank you. And then these are just some perspectives to give you guys an idea. This is right in front of 570 Merrimack Street. So this is looking right down Rogers Court, the proposed Rogers Court, and giving you an idea. The structure on the right is the existing abutters home, and then the left would be starting 4A. And then you can kind of see down the driveway. This is the view from, the bottom left is the view from 4A, looking off their patio down towards the river. And the image on the right, the rendering on the right, would be on looking at lot 3 patio, looking down towards the river as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then again, this is the same image, just a little bit blown up. this is really where we kind of wanted to show you, this is what we're requesting and proposing as, the new addition for Rogers Ford. This is a image or a rendering looking off, lot number 1, right off the patio, right down to the river. And one of the ideas too is to keep as much green as possible, as much existing as possible. We're really trying to maintain the integrity of the riverfront itself. So a lot of emphasis is gone into that. This is an image of the roundabout. Existing is the top left, and then in the bottom is what we're proposing. We'd also talked about doing a little area in tribute to the property. So that's something that we'll get into further as we do the A&R lots.
Dan?
Yep.
Thank you. So we're pretty much done here. I just want to point out, I did submit a project narrative that went through all the special permit criteria and how the project meets it. Again, we're applying the special permit criteria for one application, the subdivision standards. There is a peer review letter that has been issued. We haven't yet responded to that. Steve submitted a letter that responded to all the city staff comments. We still have to respond to the peer review comments. There'll be some minor revisions to the plans made in response to that. So we are expecting the hearing to get continued. We're going to submit a final set of plans for you to ultimately consider. You're going to provide additional feedback this evening as well, which may lead to other changes. We don't know, but just in conclusion for our presentation, as Ian said, there's been a lot of thought put into the building layout, not only for the 2 lots that are before you, but all 5 lots, coordinated effort. The proposed court will remain a private court. It will not be, the city will have no responsibilities for it. Maintenance obligations will be established in a driveway agreement to be recorded. The court does only serve 2 lots, which is one of the criteria, and just generally the building layout, the architectural design, the landscape designs have been really carefully and thoughtfully developed to protect public safety in terms of the driveway locations and designs, to enhance the streetscape to this important entry to Newburyport, and also to enhance the natural resources on the property in the riverfront area, which will be a huge focus for the Conservation Commission, obviously. So it will be in front of them. So that's it for the presentation. Thank you.
Any questions from the board?
Couple of questions.
Yep.
So, on the civil engineering plan, you mentioned that it's gonna be a private port.
Yep.
But it's gonna have a hydrant, water, and in the street, so that can be covered by some HOA agreement or some kind of agreement.
Yep.
The question is, on the backside where you have the sewer lift, and then I think I saw that it drifts over to lot 3. How will you handle that? Will lot 3 be part of an HOA, or is that just separate?
I don't think they'll be part of an HOA, but there'll be easement agreements to share the use of those utility runs. So the questions of responsibility for maintenance will be addressed in the easement documents.
Okay, so you'll
And I
have
think we'll have easement agreements, and I think we would expect, it is part of the subdivision process, so we would expect a condition that requires that those easement documents be provided prior to occupancy or something like that. So, yes.
Could you go over just a little bit more detail about the super elevated roadway and what that entails? And is that just a higher level subset, the drainage goes off to those, the various drainage that you specified?
Yeah, so, typically what you do is you crown, a larger road you crown it, so it goes to both gutter lines, and whether you create a swale or curve it and collect it with catch basins. This is very, it's only 20 feet wide, so it's basically a large driveway. So, what I've done is I've lifted this edge of the pavement, so it slopes at about 2% from when you're looking, going down from right to left. So all the stormwater flows to this gutter line that runs down the left side. So just off that gutter line, what we'll be doing is, I think it's 18 inches wide, so you have the edge of the pavement, you got an 18-inch trench. The bottom portion of the trench, you'll have it's put in 3/4 crushed stone. And then you have, I think it's either a 6 or 8, I think it's an 8-inch perforated pipe. So the water drains, the water would be picked up in that perforated pipe as it drains through. Now, providing, it doesn't look great, like 3/4 crushed stone on the surface is not very visually appealing. So what I've done, I think I did the same, this is the same drainage technique I used in Rogers Court. I think I did the same, it was a project in Newbury, off of Rolfs Lane. But so what I do is you put a layer of filter fabric, and then the top 4 inches, you do a 2 to 3 inch, 2 to 3 inch river run rounded, decorative rounded stone. So it's a lot nicer looking, you know, it's a nice rounded, clean looking stone, almost much better to look at. And then to maintain it, what happens is you end up with sediment. So the sand that probably every 2 years, 2 to 3 years, what you end up doing, it's a little bit labor intensive, but it's not horrible. You just pull that stone out, typically pull the stone out and then replace the fabric. And then you can wash it, you wash any sand out of the stone, put the stone back in, you can peel it up. I believe that's what they've been doing, down at, off of Rolfs Lane. They've done that to keep it clean and useful. I wouldn't propose this for a city street. This is not an application, just due to the fact it's a little tedious for maintenance, but that's something that a homeowner's agreement can easily take care of with a, highly qualified landscape maintenance personnel could easily take care of that maintenance.
So it is all draining to the west side?
Yes, it all drains to the west, yeah. So then what happens? Yeah, so it ends up, and then if it doesn't get picked up, I put a small area drain here if it's raining really hard. So if it's picked up in an area drain at this location, and then from here it's piped directly to this water quality unit there. So what happens is, though, there is some water that we're not picking up. So everything slopes, everything's sloping towards this island. So what we did is we put granite edging on this island. So instead of the water running over that island, it'll hit that edge and then run around and get picked up at this catch basin here. At that catch basin there. I ended up proposing a 30, it's such a small drainage area, and I'm just doing a 30-inch, Shea makes it's basically a mini manhole. A little more robust than a plastic, but it's concrete, but it's only 30 inches in diameter. We provide the full 4-foot sump with a hooded outlet for our sediment removal, but it's a little easier to install and little easier to install and less impact. So then you also have this whole area of the driveway, everything's flowing. Now everything everything flows in this manner. The apron of the garage flows away at 2%. This is coming down at 5%, and we're coming across at 2%. So we end up with a low point here. I've also curved this edge here. So we don't want water running over this edge and over that steep slope. So I provided a granite edging along that right edge, so we control the water. And then there's a low point at this area, at this point right here, that catch another 30-inch basin will pick up and convey to this central water quality unit. So, one of the items, we did do test pits out there, and it's all sand. Typically along the river, we have found that. That's one good thing about Newburyport is this whole area from the river up to High Road or High Street is all beautiful gravel and sand, low groundwater. So it's that same material. One thing we do have to make sure is that the portion, the very bottom of the chamber will be in the natural material. We are bringing fill in around it, but the bottom of it will be in the naturally occurring sand is where the infiltration will take place. But as part of that, you need, they call 44% TSS removal before you put it into the chamber. The catch basins only in the infiltration pipe or the conveyance pipe, that only gives you 25%. So I needed an additional device to give you the removal. Hence, that's why I use the mechanical, they call it a water particle separator. It's one of those 4 particle separators, which actually give you more than the 25 additional percent you need. They typically be like, depends what the unit is. It gives you between 50 and 80%. So we do meet the pre-treatment requirement before putting it into that chamber, which is important just for the longevity of the chamber.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And one question on back to the drainage again, it seems like the most sensitive area is the radius area at the bottom of the cul-de-sac, the turnaround.
Yeah.
Where it falls off.
Yeah.
Significantly. If you've got a slope of 6% coming down, do you have enough height there or enough slope back into the center island that you're comfortable with nothing overflowing and creating an issue down that slope?
So this, so we have,
It seems like a very vulnerable spot.
so one thing, so this is 2% cross slope here. We do come down, it's 5, it kind of, we start at 5, and then I think we taper to 3, this comes back at 2% here. So these grades aren't, the 2 and 3% isn't tremendous. You will have a little bit of velocity coming down here, but an important item of note here is the drain, you think about this drainage area. So everything here is flowing across. So you're gonna end up, probably it's gonna be cut off. You're gonna end up with the only water that is coming down this slope here is really just the very end of this cul-de-sac. Here, the very end of the turnaround. Most of the water is getting picked up in this location here. And that's kind of why I did the stone drip edge there. Was instead of concentrating it, the majority of the drainage area is this area here. So instead of it all concentrated in one catch basin where it might blow by, I have this long trench where it has ability to slowly weep in and pick up. And then whatever doesn't get picked up ends up, it's kind of split here a bit. This is flat. This area is all fairly flat, 2% or less. So there's not a velocity here. This all gets picked up here. So then it's just, we have this area of the cul-de-sac that ends up at this one location. And it's a 6-inch, it's grid edging. It's not berm, so the plow's not gonna knock it out of there. It's granite edging with, I believe, a 6-inch reveal. So there shouldn't be any, I'm not concerned with any water kind of charging past and up and over that reveal. If this was a 300-foot stretch of road, you'd have a torrent running down there.
But you've got a low point for that catch.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, right here.
There's a curve on the back.
That's curved.
It's
You
inside the curve.
got a 6-inch curve then the basin. So so you need that to really get, and you believe me, if you're right, if we had 200 or 300 feet of road and that was the one low point, we'd have an issue.
Yeah.
But you definitely have an issue, but it's such a small drainage area. It's only, probably less, I know it's probably 800 square feet, which isn't very much, pavement.
I noticed on, I think it's page 18 of the presentation that you depicted, the turnaround there. And it looks like you have a lot of vegetation. Would that help mitigate any of the water flow?
Oh, that would definitely, it mitigates everything that falls on the, particularly up on the cul-de-sac or any of the vegetated areas. Yes, that will help mitigate it. We're not, we're basically controlling the water we're controlling it either into the drip edge or into those 2 catch basins. We're not allowing it to run over slope. I think the main, a lot of the concern was, it was because of that steep slope, you really couldn't do country drainage or swales or something like that, because all of a sudden you have this big drop. So I was kind of forced to control it on the property before, or in that area underneath the road, prior to hitting that slope. But yeah, absolutely, the center cul-de-sac with all that vegetation and the good soils, there'll be, as far as the landscape areas, there'll be a very low rate of runoff from lot 4A coming onto the property or onto the roadway, and also from that center island into that paved area.
So thank you for explaining about that old drain from Merrimack Street that cuts diagonally across the property. Has that actually been abandoned? And the plan, it was not shown as either abandoned or to be abandoned.
Should be shown to be abandoned.
Okay, it is not abandoned now, but it will be abandoned.
Yeah.
I was wondering about how it's going to go into that new house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Might go through the basement.
Come on through.
I think I've seen houses. So, there's a statement actually in the narrative, or it's in the narrative, and it was picked up in the staff report, that said that, and the reason I'm not criticizing the narrative, but I would like to see the staff report changed in terms of the special permit findings, because it says that the court reduces the number of and frequencies of points at which vehicles may enter on Merrimack Street. But I think there's only enough frontage along the Merrimack Street side for two house lots. And so only 2 driveways anyway, and that's what's being proposed, is 2 driveways.
Yeah.
So there's no reduction in number of points. It's really just the doubling of the density on this lot 4.
Yeah, that's very, I agree.
Yeah, so there's 2 places, finding number 2 and finding number 3, that and there may be another place too, but we'll have to find another justification for seeing that finding. Let's see, so maybe this is more for Andy in terms of process. The sequence of the endorsing and recording the ANR and approving the subdivision in the court. Does that, will we be seeing the ANR?
We should be doing
The
the
same
A&R
meeting?
first.
I think so. I think that's the clean, we talked about that because you almost could skip it. If this gets approved like this, you could almost do this plan with the A and R lots and have it all endorsed, but
Yeah.
I think it might be cleaner to
It'll
do
be
an A and R
cleaner.
plan that creates lot 4.
Yeah.
And then this plan
And
that
so-
splits lot 4. So that's, yes.
Yeah. That's what-
Yeah.
And the street trees along Merrimack Street are, this is like the project that we have in Hancock Street, where the street trees are on private property. They're not public street trees. And I would like to resolve that. I think we have more room to work with here. I don't know whether it might be possibility, whether there's enough room to essentially give the city easement or right of way to the city's.
To be able to maintain those trees, you mind if I chime in, having been through that particular permitting process, and then also the city council's process for accepting the easement for those areas. I think it may be helpful for us to reach out more on this, but touch base on the council side essentially. About the idea of accepting that responsibility, or not so much the responsibility, I should say, because the permit there, I think here would be maintained, the private trees are being maintained there. But I think the idea there, Rick, if I'm not mistaken, was that the city would be able to go in there and take care of issues, as typically as the tree would do for any street trees that are important to the streetscape. So, that worked out with the condition that basically just said the tree warden would take care of those trees if need be. The only thing I have any hesitation about here, I don't have any problem with that, so I'd be in favor of the city having the right to do those things. We did have maybe one council do, but who were a little hesitant about the idea that the plain with discussion and assumptions here might presuppose that the council would want to accept those things. They all makes perfect sense to me here. At the end of the day, we craft the language and decision to make it a requirement that it's offered to the city, but if it doesn't get accepted, that challenge it. Way we know that the applicant and the developing team is not hanging there indefinitely if the city council decides not to accept it, but at least it's been offered to your point. I suggest that potential option only that if you want to do that, it might, and again, I'd be in favor of the acceptance of that, right? Yeah. But I just can imagine for some hesitation, the council, at least, we have a mechanical way in the decision to deal with if they don't accept it.
So, yeah, let's just talk about the street trees quickly here. So there are 2 street trees existing that are gonna be retained. I think they're on either side of that driveway that's going into lot 3. Is that right, Steve?
One of them's gonna go.
One of them,
So, yeah, so we're actually, we've had an initial discussion with Mike Hennessy, and I believe Elise, I think Mike, he had some quick comments, I think, on the planting, but the plan is to work with Mike on what, what works there. But one of those trees will need to go, it's too tight, it's pretty tight to split between. I think the one to the west would have to go. The other thing is those trees are they're in that planting strip, and the wires are right above it, as far as those two street trees. Which Mike said you can plant, he doesn't have a problem with this planting street trees in that strip. He said you just gotta make sure you use the smaller ones to plant that planting strip. I think it's like a 3-foot strip between,
so I think what, we want to work with, we'll work with Mike and with you. And the only reason I'm even still talking about it is that the easement maintenance thing complicates things quite a bit. So if there's a way to give the city the right to come, so if there are certain trees that are proposed not within the right of way, but on the private property, and you want to ensure that those trees are going to be maintained, and if they die, they're going to be replaced. Number one, you can do that in the special permit. Put that obligation through the special permit on the property owner and all successors. It's a recorded document.
And that's what happened with the other.
Yeah, and I think you can also provide a condition that if they don't live up to their responsibilities on that, the city can come in and do the work themselves. Do you need an easement for them to do that? I think that's just like.
That, and sort of proper encumbrance on the property beyond just the board's decision and sort of the idea of, taking without compensation on something like that, right? So it's just very clear at that point that there's no ambiguity for the right to go on the property and the building.
Yeah,
I don't, I'm not a big fan, frankly, of all the extra bureaucratic mechanical process that happen. But there is a way that this was addressed. It's the only time that I've been here that literally like a small rectangular cargo on the property to see where the trees and pits were. The tree wouldn't be able to do that. And again, I don't know if the council will accept another one or anything like that before, but we can accommodate that in a similar fashion in the way you're describing if the board so chooses in the application, we'll work together.
we'll work with you.
And one more question, what is the electric service to the back lot? How is that?
So there hasn't been a work order. Typically, we don't know if they get a work order in. I foresee it'll be underground. There'll be, something underground either on this edge. Typically, they don't want under the pavement. And sometimes if there's not enough room, there might be an easement, an electric easement along this edge. Most likely, I foresee that typically what is usually they can bring 2 off of one transformer. So there's probably gonna be either probably a box here, maybe, pop over here, probably somewhere around here, I bet. At that point.
So there is, it is a requirement, for the subdivision regulations to have the underground service.
Yes.
So we would, at some point, we had this issue, 45 Lane,
We did.
Yes.
and we don't want to have the issue again.
So we should be able to deal with that in a condition, right? So prior to occupancies, issuance of an occupancy permit or whatever landmark you want to specify, you get this nailed down, and if it needs to be underground, we specify that in the condition, right?
And the zoning administrator would verify that prior to getting occupancy.
Right.
And
Yeah.
DPS to look at it too.
Right.
Cable, the same way, cable service, I mean, everything underground.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to look at, most likely it'll be a drop. That the power's on our side of the street. So we wouldn't need an overhead coming across. It would drop down one of the poles, probably the one somewhere in front of lot 483. I'm not sure. Yeah, there's one there.
Yeah, maybe if you're doing I don't know if that works or not, but if you're doing an easement for the sewer anyway, you could say line 3,
Yeah, actually, you could run,
between 3 and 4A.
you could,
That's-
Who's that? Power company or you?
there'd be power company would have to agree to it. They'd want an easement, but you get an easement there. They just want easements in place typically now. But yeah, it makes sense that you could probably hit all 3. Hit 3 from, between those 2.
Yeah, I guess the only comment, and they'll specify it, I'm sure, is if you put an easement, it's gotta be accessible, so then when people put fences and landscape.
Yeah.
And then they realize, oh.
Yeah.
You know, that's why the streets are, or along the streets are benefit.
Yeah.
Let them figure that out.
Okay. Put it up for public comment. Comments, please come forward.
Well, we're looking forward to, seeing, I'm, an abutter.
Come on up.
I'm sorry, if you could come forward and state your name and address.
My name is Patty Critchlow, and I live at 566. I'm from the house that's going to be the White House. And, I have met with Eric, Heather. They showed me their plans, and it all looks, very, very well thought out. And, my neighbors here, I looking forward to seeing the property. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? We will close public comment then. Come back to the board for any other deliberation. Motion.
Sorry, if I could. Sure. Just to help out, obviously typically with these projects, obviously we have a number of things that Jeff mentioned, that the applicants can go back and tweak a few things before returning to the board, and I defer to your business with the applicant for that sort of thing, but if there's anything specific that you want to incorporate or adjust it here, obviously, beyond the discussion we already had, helpful to incorporate those now. So I'm assuming, of course, a continuance here in context, but if there's anything specific that you're concerned about.
It seems like from all of the discussion that there are comments that still need to be addressed formally. Peer review comments from the city, things that the board has brought in. So I'm assuming that we would all be interested in seeing those comments addressed formally on your plans, in your presentation, and those can then be addressed in the condition. As we go forward.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Just in terms of your own process, do you typically do you like to see draft decisions before you vote? So you're voting on that decision?
They'll be
I'm only asking because we're having to work through that in the meantime.
I think we should for some of the things that we talked about. Some of them are sort of boilerplate and we don't run through that here.
Yeah, just like special
The
conditions.
special conditions,
Yep.
exactly. So I think for some of these, we definitely should. We can work together. Caitlin and I in the office can work together with you on that piece. Jeff, we work together. Just to make sure we're all good, but I think we can definitely work on that. I don't think there's anything else in the plan, but those we'll definitely work on. I think you'll see that with the staff report coming back next time. That'll be hopefully the discussion with the applicant. We'll be on the same page at that point. There won't be anything that's sort of hanging, or question ambiguous. And then it just be hopefully at that point, the plan has everything, but unless there's something else to be identified here this evening, we would be, obviously more than happy to do that. I don't know in terms of the applicant's time, checking on whether that's really realistic in 2 weeks or 4 weeks, a date that does make sense.
And when you need the revised plans by?
Oh, yeah, sorry, no less than a week before the meeting, those things would have to be uploaded to the website for the record. And that way the board members can have time to review that and we can get a staff report to where things are. So you really don't want to forget you really need to have that actually for the meeting.
So you need to have revised plans by next week or by 3 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should go 3 weeks. And is that makes more sense. We also are going to meet with the commission. We're not expecting that to lead to any changes to this part of the project, but so you're not your next meeting, but the one after that is when? First?
Correct, yeah, it makes more sense to me in context to do that.
April 2nd.
April 2nd. Yeah.
So I think that makes sense, right? So we would request a continuance to April 2nd. We'll work with you on these topics. In the meantime, we'll go to the commission. We'll submit at least 1 week in advance the updated materials. Should be good.
So So question, when would you take up the A and R approval?
Oh, so I think what we're gonna see is after the approval of this, Jeff, but I think what we're gonna see is the NR plan will come in at some time frame after that. Break off the lots here that we're talking about, four being up to an entirety, and then the subdivision plan, that's consistent with this coming along right after that on for lot four A and B.
So,
Makes sense.
to be clear, we'll be voting on the approval of the subdivision plan after the
Special
endorsement,
permit
after,
issue.
or after the endorsement. So maybe on the second, all three plans could come together.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, time.
Does that make sense?
we could do that. I had actually expected that we would just address the A and R process in a condition of approval. So once the approval is issued, it would but we can get, I think.
I've asked for that, and I think you've been uncomfortable with having.
Yeah, okay.
Condition,
So,
or conditioning approval on a future plan.
Oh, no, I think we can craft that here. I'm not, I think it really, to your question,
Yeah.
but it really comes down to the condition as drafted in the special permit. So I think we can certainly craft that and work that in here, so it's efficient process.
We have to create lot four.
Right,
So
right.
we almost need to have, the A and R, I see what you're saying, so
As long as we have the A and R plan to reference,
there's so much stuff in the subdivision plan that's not in the special permit. In terms of,
yeah.
that, I'd feel comfortable if we had all of it together.
At once. Yeah, I mean, if you're able to submit the plans.
We should be able to do that. It's already drafted.
Yeah.
A draft of it's in your package, but we should be able to get that submitted. You could then vote on that,
Oh, no, sorry. I'm just
even
thinking about-
before the special
We
permit.
can look at the conditions of the language, we can even touch base offline on this, to feel comfortable with the language and how it's tied together. Such that it's all coming in at one point, we don't have a whole lot of back and forth after that, but at the end of the day, it's really the special permit's gonna capture that condition here about the subdivision they are, and how they get endorsed and.
We just don't want to live in two worlds.
Yeah, yeah.
We say, oh, you don't have, but that's covered by that.
Yes.
You know, and A and R is pretty.
If this was already.
It's just simple enough thing. I think we should just get it done that
That's
night.
what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Get
I
it
think
to
that makes sense.
sense.
Yep.
I mean, the A and R plan can technically come in,
You could even come in at the next meeting.
Correct, correct. That's.
Steve, but.
That's up there. So,
Forever.
Let's see what he says about that, but I do agree, it would just be cleaner to just get it done. Easy enough. Yeah.
The conditions get shorter, the language of the conditions gets
Exactly.
shorter, which is in everybody's benefit.
Right. Fair enough.
Away from motion.
We move to continue the special permit application to April 2nd.
And the definitive, so
And then subdivision.
We have to do a roll call. Ryan,
Yes.
Jen,
Yes.
Alden,
Yes.
Charlie,
Yes.
Rick,
yes.
Jack,
Yes,
Matt,
Yes.
and I am also, yeah. So
Great.
continue, we'll see you on,
Sounds good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
thank you very much. The general business.
Thank you.
We don't yet have meeting minutes from the 19th. We'll push that off
Yeah. So, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, so I apologize, I'm not the person, but I want to actually. Administrator as well, but on the signage ordinance, if I could briefly just recap where that is and where it's headed. I imagine Rick and I will spend a little bit more time on that piece there, but there's a lot in the sign ordinance to update. I should note, this is in the signage section of the zoning ordinance, so earlier today, or yesterday and today, the coach office has going into the next council packet, this ordinance amendment to do with the sign section. we could obviously review and, make any tweaks from there if anybody has any suggestions, but we were anxious after some time and a lot of discussion about the signage ordinance and other things around date. Unfortunately, we keep getting signals from some of the council about that they're gonna have to do ordinance amendments and changes and things like that. So we want to keep plowing ahead with updates to code. They tend to get outdated. There are various reasons to do so. So in essence, this amendment is doing a couple of things, and I'll just briefly recap what's in there, and then I'll email it out to you in the morning. If you have any thoughts on it, I guess in the Word version too, if you want, and we can, see where things go from there. But we wanted to mainly because of the council's process and the requirement of having a public hearing, get through the submission of the council process, is what kicks off that process. So, in order to get the bureaucracies underway, we have a council sponsor. Councilor Harmon's been kind enough to sponsor this. And in brief, I'll just recap briefly the main substantive things that are happening in here, and there's obviously wordsmithing, but the goal here is, like other sections of the ordinance that we see this year, just keep plowing ahead with updates to these sections, and if you have any thoughts and want to tweak things when we're in the public hearing process, that's the time we can do it. If we have thoughts before that, obviously we'll craft and edit it in there going. We also don't know how the council, the general public, will fit in, in terms of any public feedback, but I'm just going to summarize briefly what we're trying to do here from the planning office's perspective. Where I should clarify, by the way, because it's one of the discussion points that I have with staff, and we've had the planning board and council over the years and others is, do we come up with an entirely new structure for the ordinance or the section involved versus keeping the section and everything and what everybody's familiar with? And this one is essentially using the structure and the sequencing of what's in there, not migrating too far away from that. We've sometimes had issues where people feel uncomfortable more on the council side, generally speaking, but the idea that if we completely wholesale restructure the section, there's some concern about it. So in some cases, we've decided not to tinker too much with that and just sort of utilize the existing ordinance and then amend from there. So here you're seeing mark on that existing ordinance. It's stricken through and the underline for new text. So one thing we're addressing in the purpose section a little bit is just clarification. We're really trying to, this is going with some case law, but in essence, the Reed versus Gilbert case law relatively recently, and I think there'll be some new case law in the future, refine it a bit, but one thing we want to do throughout this ordinance here, and I should clarify, we're also in the section clarifying further down that there are several different general ordinance sections that deal with signage and installations in the public right of way or other locations. And this is the complexity of updating city codes, is we have to go back and take it with these other sections too. So I'll be working separately with the council on that piece there, unless obviously if you folks have questions about those sections. That primarily deals with the public right of way and a few things related to public property specifically. But our zoning ordinance is really dealing with all the parcel properties in the city, so outside the right of way, including public properties. So here, we see some overlap between these, but we're trying to make it clear what these general ordinances are dealing with versus the zoning ordinance and vice versa. We also clarify, for instance, where the downtown overlay district in another section has some particular requirements that folks should look there. This also goes for structure of ordinances, so it'd be great if all signage things were in one place, but the way the ordinances evolve over time and things get added based on the preferences at that time, and it's hard to somehow always keep things where they belong. So in essence, where, for instance, by example here, the smart growth district, the state literally wants us to have a separate ordinance for that, not move things somewhere else. Is part of the approval process, make us do that, that's what we did. So there's signage requirements in there, and so we just clarify this signage section of our entire ordinance. Please look there. So again, this is, there's an ideal world where everything comes in a very efficient package and all signage stuff is in all one section. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So the consequence here is we're just trying to make it very clear to a reader that if you're looking for all the signage regulations, where you should be going, if you're looking for those other things and where jurisdiction is.
Can I interrupt you right here?
Yeah, please.
I can anticipate that when we have a waterfront overlay district updated, there'll be some sign regulation.
Good point.
Do you want to have a sentence in here that says,
Thank
it
you.
refers to other
Yeah.
overlay districts?
Yes. That's a great point. I originally, when we were starting to do some of this rewrite process, the idea was like, let's have generic language, and we were talking about structuring the ordinance where all the overlays are in one section, right? And we'll eventually get there in terms of a proper structure, but every time we try to bit off too much at once and restructure, it becomes a problem to do that. So to your point, I think we should definitely use some boilerplate language in that effect, so that even if we have some difficulty with the council reorganizing where things are or something like that, then we have boilerplate language that covers that more broadly than just the specific ones that are here. So we did that in another case. We should do the same here. Sorry, jump in if you have anything on this. So generally speaking, we're just clarifying what this section does. There's a couple of language tweaks in here and out elsewhere in the ordinance that are dealing with the fact that we're trying to avoid, and Rick, please feel free to chime in if we're jumping on this as well, but what we're trying to avoid is essentially focusing too much on the content of the sign. I don't want to go so far as to say we can't read the content of the signs, because you do have to read some of that. But in essence, there's case law, this reverse a little bit into, we really, it goes back to free speech. So we really shouldn't be regulating so much the content of that message that's in there, so much as say, and this is what we're trying to do here, is regulating the size, the style, what can be allowed, spatially a lot, placement and scale and so forth. Types of signs, illumination and flashing and all that kind of stuff that could be problematic, that's actually about the type of sign. As well as things like, is it related to an underlying land use? So that's something we can show a clear nexus to. I think we have more ability to defend that if someone were ever challenged something based on this case law. We're trying to basically take out phrasing that's dealing with things like, well, is that a political sign or is it not? Or, so things like that, you see a little bit of tweaks in the language to take out some phrasing like that and to really focus on what do we care about in terms of aesthetics, those signs. There continues to be in here a temporary signage section dealing with, the temporary placement of these signs. But because they're in short duration, the zoning administrator can say, look, these things need to be enforced. They've been there for too long,
Is there a fundamental change that results?
I
mean, what are the change?
don't, yeah, sorry. So that piece is really, I would argue, is more about taking out some specific language. I will show one to answer your question. There's a second, I'll get to in a second. It does. We see the majority of the deletion, let's say, content related to that. But for the most part, you have this clarification of what jurisdictions cover here and everything else is. There's a few definitions that change in here, and I'm sorry, because I am going to answer your question. There is a wayfinding, in the addition of wayfinding signage you'll see here. The idea was to basically allow a streamlined process by which having consolidated signs for say wayfinding in a downtown or in the entire business park, or even in some cases like if you look at the end of Newburyport Way, having all those A-frames that are clustered out there blocking ways, blowing around, sometimes downtown's an issue. Why not allow a streamlined process where the business park association or the entire street, all the business on the street could come in and say, we're gonna put in one sign, it's very easily organized. And this was just the initial thought about like how to have that be done in a streamlined fashion. I wasn't as keen on running it through a city council process or, even necessarily if it needs to come here. I'm open to whatever the option is there, but I do want to kind of streamline the ability to do wayfinding signage when it's being reviewed and administered by the city itself. We know that that's not going to get right, hopefully. And what it really is intended to do is get rid of all the clutter that's happening and make it a good system. So that's what that piece is there. We clarify, we use better language about the fact that signs get a permit, they're not really building permits, they're a sign permit. We make it clear if you don't exercise the permits, they take it away. Again, obviously the same grant housing zoning stays in place. There is a whole section here, I won't go through in depth, but there's a whole section here dealing with general regulations for signs and some particulars, about internal illumination and, what types of. We made a few adjustments. We've tried to, beyond that section right there, there's two things in here that you'll see that your question. Municipal signage, we just want to clarify. So for instance, the fact that our signage ordinance right now says you can't have freestanding signs outside the business park really says that we can't have municipal signage on a park property that says like, you're arrived at Cherry Hill, Starkville. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So at least in my view. So what we've done is we put a provision just clarifying that allowance in there. We have a sample of some sign, a sign that goes, we've seen a number of these like senior center arriving, two granite posts, sort of a, in between. We can tweak these if people have thoughts on, particular size scale and so forth, but these are largely based on existing ordinance or provisions that are, consolidated here. But there's another option allowed, other than sort of identifying the property or giving rules and regs. You might see this in recreational facilities in particular, but also allowing a one freestanding sign that's really related to things like financial contributions to donors. It specifically came from concern of the Parks Commission in terms of it looks like there's some fundraising efforts that are going on, but there's some sign where it's allow a sign like that. We have obviously you don't want to allow any further clutter, so to speak, in the city, but we thought there was a reasonable way to balance that. In having signs that are, minimal in the number of locations, so here, where there's a recreational facility or, type involved, not more of Mall, Atkinson Common, but really we're talking about lower, Atkinson, Pioneer Fields type thing, right?
Is there a time, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Is there a time frame? Like say they put up a big municipal regulatory sign or one showing support for donors, does it stay up forever? I mean, it doesn't seem like there's-
Yeah, so here from the zoning perspective, this isn't really basically saying there's a dead point, it's not like a temporary sign. But the Parks Commission, for instance, that would have care and custody, there's a reference here, the division of the city with care and custody has to also review and approve, right, to make it on the same page. And whether that's school department or Parks Commission, but that commission could say that can only be there for a certain duration of time, for instance, because it's tied to certain improvements. So I don't know how that'll be sort
You're
of.
just thinking about like a 32 foot by 32 by 8, right?
Yeah,
And it just sits there forever and maybe it's not a favorable sign for the community.
yeah.
What, is there, can you put a time frame on it or?
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, it's a policy level discussion and it overlaps a little bit. Well, we might hear as we get into this discussion. Might chime in on this piece, but they might have some concerns because they'd want to, I think, allow enough flexibility for that sign to stay as long as it's tied to it's the lifespan of the thing that was funded.
Right, exactly.
So I don't know, but to your point, I assume it would come off at some point, that name gets replaced.
That's the word that I
I
try to avoid, the assume.
Yeah, I think the idea here is that, because it's actually come up, to your point, it's actually come up before. The naming thing before with benches in particular, the city council talking about recently, the idea do you get that indefinitely? Because obviously at some point the bench is no longer usable, someone else is paying for a new one, or it's retrofitted, so that's been identified as something that makes sense to change. I'm assuming here, and I certainly support the idea, I'm not gonna wordsmith, but I think our goal here between, office planning, development, parks, and the I'd rather have uniformity to these things at park facilities, for instance, to go to recreational facility, it's got the 2 granite posts in between. And those names are there for maybe a 10-year period or 5-year period, then replaced in the new one that has been pointed recent things and something like that, but not having just a
What about like multiple signs? Doesn't limit that either, you could have.
No, this is the one freestanding sign only per frontage in this provision, so per frontage where there's recreational facilities of some type. And so we were trying to put, this is really more, the parks side was saying,
Reduce the clutter.
can we have this? And the opposite planning development was saying, all right, we can do that, but we really need to try to set a cap, some thresholds, and we really didn't want it to get out of control. So, I mean, for our initial reaction to that was, we should consider that to be clutter out of the gates and then see how do we, craft a way into that. So what we came up with was something here sort of on the balance. And again, we can tweak and adjust from here, but we were trying to come up with something that would allow, one only for that frontage, only on those properties and those frontages that have that recreational facility, not other park, or facility in the city.
I was thinking L, not M.
Sorry?
I was kind of referencing L, not necessarily.
Oh, L, sorry. Yeah, I mean, again, here we could put in only one. We could adjust the size of the size of it, for instance, Jennifer and I talked about the height, for instance, whether that's something like 8 feet, I'd be perfectly fine saying 5 feet, generous feet. There's a lot of, there might be a situation you need some flexibility.
Sure.
And I'd be perfectly happy to sort of, tweak on that, but I'm perfectly fine also pulling things down and kind of keeping things at a.
What a little city.
We don't want billboards.
So is the sign structure included in the measurement?
The structure itself is not the panel. So for instance, if it was just a granite post, the post is not counted.
What I'm thinking about is the signs that we have at the entrance to the road.
Yeah.
The whole structure is 8 foot 1 inch tall.
Yeah.
You've got 8 foot there, so I didn't know whether we had to cut off that inch.
Yeah.
Also, but the sign itself is much less than 8 feet, the sign is probably 4 feet.
Yeah.
But it's an 8 foot structure.
There are a few instances in which we'd have to interpret depending on how it's structured, how it's done, but we're gonna take that larger surface or structure and count it against the sign, generally speaking. So, and I know there's some of the signs that have a slightly unique situation, like for instance, like the calculation of the language, like calculate the area of a sign with a square, a circle or a sphere. But yeah, we're gonna basically go on the more restrictive side and say that's gonna count as part of the area involved. If there's something that's sort of at the grade level, it's just, a component that's attached to the ground and the columns coming up, we're not really penalizing for that. But if it's gonna be perceived as part of the surface area that's blocking a view, let's say, we're trying to keep that surface.
I think
area.
that's good, it's a good reference point, but those signs are 8 feet by 3 feet wide, 3 feet tall by 3 feet wide.
Yeah,
So that's what you're really talking about, pretty much here, so that's a reference.
it is a good reference point, yeah, I mean, I'm conflicted myself if I least amount of signage sort
But the next
of.
one-
At the same time, there's a need to identify certain places, like a lot of things you don't need that as much these days with GPS. So I'm more than amenable to, making tweaks on these. There's always a reasonable argument to make about reducing or adjusting heights and sizes and so forth. For instance, let us see what the non-regulatory donor signs is at 5 feet in height. This one was an 8 foot height allowance. Again, some, these are each coming from some other, places like the existing provision and so forth. So I'm not gonna go too far in depth. I think the real question for us is, do we want to tweak, something to this? And if so, what is it going to be? Yeah. So I'm sorry, I wrote that.
It's another-
Question.
Is part of these in the sign regulation, is there letter sign restrictions? Like if it's just on a building, but it's just block letters? There's no,
there is some allowance for using lettering, for instance, but generally speaking, that's still gonna be, depending on what type of sign is, that's gonna be treated as a sign. For the area that encapsulates the rectangle, that encapsulates the lettering. So if you put the lettering in the building, we're gonna take a rectangle around that and count that as letters and we're gonna add them up, right? So we're gonna basically.
so there, it's covered in there. There's language that.
Yeah,
covers
there's language in here. There are some things like in the downtown, you can't put it on the brick surface. So, the unpainted brick surfaces that we have that are historic, it's sort of, those, again, these are all
So
policy.
you're asking a question, is
It's
there a
like-
measurement definition, how you cover it?
Like a market basket sign,
Right.
right?
Yeah, There's a
Massive.
definition of that in here, but I think to your question, we're always looking to improve on things like that, so. We've looked at different examples elsewhere, if there's something that you feel, isn't, let me know. But we do have definition of how that's calculated, but I do think there are sometimes instances we haven't foreseen, or they could come up and we want to.
So I just, when I lived in Natick, the Natick Mall had Filene's and Sears and me and Marcus, you went through, it never made sense to anybody. The people that wrote it, the people that were buying, because Filene's had thin lettering, but it was the size of, and they came up with this wacky internal area, useful area. I was like, what? It's,
It's a rectangle.
yeah, you could make
Yeah.
it this thin and make it the size of the building.
Right.
So I'll look for that, and when you send it to me, I'll look for
Yeah,
that.
I definitely agree with, as much generally speaking, starting with the premise that you want to calculate the largest possible area of what's being created here. And because it's adding spatial clutter to, the environment, the character of the city.
Are we looking, it's a general idea, forgive me if this has already been put out there, to have a certain character of lettering and signs to kind of be in line with.
No, because that-
Represents.
We're going in a little bit into the free speech stuff on the private side. I'm very big, particularly on the public side. We have a lot of like the park facilities with the hanging signs, all that thing, right? I'm a big fan of having consistency. So, like Fuller Field, for instance, if you have a sign there, you're going in and you see Fuller Field, you're right. Jennifer and I were having a discussion, why not put the donor signs, the names on the back of the sign as you're leaving the site, you get it right? Why do we need a new structure, that kind of thing, right? Apparently in the discussions, there are some people who want like a totally separate sign structure, and so we have these sort of balancing points here.
And it's a logo thing too, right? It's like, when you get into the logo world, that's where, for a business, that's where it gets crazy, because the logo could be this massive thing. Well, that's a sign.
Yeah,
That's your recognition.
and we'll treat that as a sign. Yeah, and that's actually, you made me think of, that's a good example of one of the sort of free speech things we took out of this. There was language in the ordinance that we really can't enforce. Basically, that you can't use brand names and trademarks and those things. Sort of like large companies,
kinda have-
Amazon can't be on a sign. Well, we can't enforce, say you can't have one of those. I think the idea is along the lines of.
You really,
So we include in the sign.
You say that, but maybe I haven't read the new case law. But if you go to like, I don't know, Stowe, Vermont, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
Where, McDonald's couldn't have a big old McDonald's. You can barely see the golden arches.
well, that's the finding, so.
But that's the area, not the fact, not the idea that they couldn't have their. we can't say, you can't have your trademark, is basically the language we have right now implies that we would be saying no to some of those, and that's not really consistent.
Well, you could have your M, they could have the M, but it has to fit, like you were saying,
Yeah.
within a certain dimension.
Yeah. Yes.
Maybe it's, circled by like.
Yeah.
Clapboard or something, has to be
Yeah.
a certain way.
I don't know if either of you, I don't know if either of you remember the CVS sign, it was at Barlow Mall years ago before they. So it currently is a billboard, it's now it's a giant white CVS sign, right, with red lettering, right? But years ago, and I have pictures, because it was a dispute between myself and the building commissioner at the time, it was the butter who raised the concern. But it wasn't enforced at the time of this issue, but they had effectively changed the surface of that sign, I can send you the picture, but it was basically 4 or 5 lines of white text, sort of like a marquee type thing. And the reason I point that out is because to me, the CVS sign that's there today feels much more like a billboard than that one did. It felt a little bit more like a directory sign or something like that was there. And the font sizes, because they were smaller, and they were basically, there was a little bit more, because the lines that were in there, it's a bit more dark surface. So now it's creating this giant sort of bright thing, right? It's been there for years, but I was of the opinion that was a violation of the ordinance and had to go back to the board for review, because I was concerned that was bastardizing the Bartlett Valley. I had a giant billboard there. But at any rate, that's one example of some things that can happen.
Flat sign almost where like it had a hierarchy with
Yes.
express video.
Yes.
Whitehead.
Yes.
And actually, it's a good point about white, darker color of white versus lighter color of dark. Because you have the same size.
Yes.
And if the ordinance says, because a lot of the signs at Port Plaza are the lighter, darker back. And they seem much less intrusive.
Yeah.
Than a CVS with red on point.
I agree 100%. I mean, again, there's many different options, and I'm sure as the readers might come up with others, we'll throw it in and tweak from here. But the halo lights, for instance, I'm a big fan of halo lighting as a way of doing some of what they're trying to achieve in a much more subtle way, so that it's not, broadcasting so much. So, we wanted to add specific phrasing about that. I'm actually in favor of sort of encouraging some, keeping it away from broadcasting.
Did you think at all about discussion about actually exempting the city from regulations, because it's a city agency that is determining what's, it seems.
Yeah.
To have a,
Yeah.
to make the city go through
Yeah.
a zoning approval for a sign
Yeah.
that the city council has approved.
That's a very good. We've certainly had that discussion. Made complete progress on the idea but the idea of even city uses, for instance, that's another thing. But I think here on balance, we might have some others who are concerned about the idea that we haven't put a cap on it, let's say. The park signs might be an example of that, for instance. So a ton of people are saying, oh, I give money if I get a sign. And there's no cap on it. That's one reason, for instance, why, and again, there's different layers of control. There would be a body of the city that's responsible for answering for folks who are offended by the number of signs, how it happened or what was appropriate. But I think, and to your point, we can take out, I would be perfectly fine in a lot of cases, exemption for the city, because we're serving the public a lot of reasons for having exemptions for public real purposes. But I think the logic, at least in structure right now, is that there's at least a cap on the clutter side.
Have you looked at, for example, the middle school sign to see how that fits in these regulations?
We haven't measured every sign around, but we certainly have been looking at some of this, like whether they're comps. I tend to be on a going forward basis, so there might be things that are grandfathered today, but we may not want to mimic. But to your point, I think what we might be thinking is with the council, with the plan where the council, a slide sequence, here are some of the signs that we have around the city. We can't go through all the options and examples for this, but here are some of the things that illustrate some of the size, scale, and if we have a park donor signage, for instance, or illustrate some of the things we're trying to encourage or avoid.
I guess my sense is things like the rail trail signs and Knox school signs are perfectly appropriate for the scale of the activity. So I would not want to write an ordinance that in the future prohibit that.
Agreed. I think, I'll do some rereading this, thinking about that, but, and again, if you see anything, I definitely agree with more flexibility. I would argue it's not unfair to me. It's because I actually think that the public is being served by the city. So, there's a very good distinction between like private sector is completely served, private sector. That being said, there could be some reasonable regulation and, for aesthetics in the report, I think, through the zoning, but I also, generally speaking, think that there should be more latitude. The fact that we don't allow freestanding signs anywhere in the city outside the business park or code, but we obviously need to identify public facilities like you're driving off High Street to the senior center in Bresnahan, you have no idea what's there. Yes, you're using GPS, but that's a very appropriate place to have a sign. And so our code should at least accommodate something like that. I wouldn't want to see a donor sign on the street there, but Fuller Field or, Cherry Hill seem like a reasonable place to have it.
Or like in the competition of the rail trail, to have an exception of the map or a waypoint, that's part of it.
Yeah, we did try, there's language in here, we're trying to make it clear that things like, interpretive signage or, smaller signage that's dealing with like, rules for use of the park property, that kind of like small. We can take a look at wordsmith, but we did try to capture language that allows those things without sort of looping them in and sort of making it seem like those are also regulated and prohibited because there's a reason for having them too. Obviously to your point, Rick, I mean, there is some deference that has to be given to the department or division involved, so if we keep an eye on the number of signs, they should also care about,
Yeah, and I guess what I was fascinated with what you were saying about the, the municipal side of the signage.
Yeah.
But you could write those rules as rules that the city has that aren't to the public turning, basically.
Yeah.
So you govern size and expectations, but if you improved over time or you made an exception,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have to violate. Hey, I think you're getting an exception over here. Exactly, right, your own variance.
And frankly, for that sole reason is the one that I'm most persuasive, like by the aesthetic side, I'm like, we gotta put a cap, we gotta have some kind of provisions. On the streamlining side, because of how long it takes to get things done in a logical way, I'm much more in favor of saying, look, have it be a streamlined process. There is always a responsible entity, if it's the properties under the school department, or the Parks Commission, or the Conservation Commissioner, there's always a responsible entity, and there should be an explanation for having billboards go by, that should be there.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'm amenable to, more flexibility on those lines and really relying upon a division of the city to keep an eye on some of those things, like, the rest of us, rather than saying this ordinance has to come in. I'm amenable to those things. I just, as only today, I certainly support the idea of, aesthetic improvement in the city.
You'll be sending this.
Yeah, so I'll send this out. I think the wayfinding thing is like really smooth. It's hard to capture something that allows that to happen. The reason I mentioned that in here is wayfinding might happen in the public right of way a lot. You think about it for navigation type things, and we're thinking about downtown. But there are locations where it might be beneficial to have it on public property for some reason, or private property. And as long as we have the agreements and it's all worked out, I do want to allow some in the zoning ordinance for that to be facilitated while we're in there taking the second of the ordinance. And we've talked so much about wayfinding, so that's why it's in there. But keep in mind that there is this discussion now with the council, which we'll be engaging in, about, the signs right away and clutter there and all those things. Some of it touching properties like parks property.
So what is your time frame again, Andy? I must have missed that. When would you like this feedback back?
Well, so we're gonna be having a hearing on this amendment as you're seeing it.
Yeah.
And so it's basically prior to that hearing, if you're able to, or at the time of the hearing, we're gonna have our usual process. It's just that unfortunately, because of how long it takes when everything backs up through a bunch of different cycles, there's a number of folks who just like myself and others who are anxious to get the zoning change done and signing. So we weren't waiting, we're willing to wait any longer and be like, let's go to another committee meeting. It's like, let's bring something forward. We can and changes folks want. So you have weeks before we're gonna have a hearing. It'll probably be in late, it's gonna be late. It's gonna be probably first meeting in April at this point, maybe we can.
But you'd take feedback anytime between now.
Yeah, anytime. Thank you. The only difficulty I typically have is the most streamlined way you can provide whatever feedback to me is best, because I end up getting feedback from a number of different places, and sometimes there are different versions of Word documents. Sometimes there are bullet lists. Sometimes the comments don't agree with each other. And that becomes a burden to try to merge it all together in a way that satisfies everybody, as cleanly as possible. So each of you have to do, when you get the document, you can put it in the Word markup. You can send me a bullet list back and say, I have a concern with this or that, page this, whatever works for you, but the
Okay.
simplest way of giving me feedback in a coherent way, that way I can try to do my best to consolidate all the edits and adjustments into something that, hopefully addresses everybody's concerns. If it doesn't, we can discuss, where something, the policy, debate has to happen, and we'll figure it out. in your
Is
meeting.
it- I think we're just speaking for myself, but
Yeah.
maybe others share it. I always like to get my feedback in early so that when we have the hearing, I'm not wide-eyed going, oh, how does that work? I
Yeah.
haven't really thought it through, and if I have to write it down, I've thought it through.
Yeah.
If I just hear it, I go, oh, that sounds good.
Yeah. So I'll send the Word version, so you're welcome to mark that. If you use Word markup tools, you can do that.
Yeah.
That's also easier for us to use as well, to take feedback. We'll get other versions from other people, and so
Yeah.
I'll, try to merge and sort those out. Sometimes the language agreements aren't always the same, so. If it's a substantive thing, we'll have to debate it. If it's a language thing, it's usually easy enough for people that it's.
Is it going to the city council on Monday?
So it's going to the council on Monday, so we can simply use that meeting to send it to committee, at which point we would.
To April 2nd, and everything.
I think it's probably April 2nd. Again, defer to you folks. I usually check with the chair of this board as well as the chair of the planning development of the city council when we schedule a date, but probably would have aimed for something like April
Well, we
2nd.
can't do it in.
Yeah, I don't really. Yeah. See what happens, special meeting.
But if you send it to us and we said, let's have any input for the meeting on the 19th.
Yeah,
That'd be a good
you'd have a
date
couple
in the
weeks.
sand.
We could add it, we could keep it on the agenda, we could discuss, and that way even prior to the hearing, we could vet amongst ourselves some of the things that, folks might have thoughts.
Sounds like.
Yeah, because I know talking to Jamie, he was saying,
Yeah.
same thing, give me an assignment and tell me when,
Yeah.
and I'll shoot towards it.
So I'll just mention in my email, especially since it's not everybody here, I'll just mention, please, if you don't have return comments, please bring them at least to the meeting on the, night. Good. Yeah, again, anything else, you'll see anything else in there, but that's, I think, the point. Clarification. We did, by the way, one thing that, just to clarify, just so you understand the structure of it, there was a separate document left over lingering for years from the redevelopment authority that signage regulations, and so we were cross-referencing that. And based on the sort of, usual processes and haphazard things that sort of happened based on people's preferences at the time, that got incorporated in the signage ordinance as a separate document, which is very confusing for people to find information, right, for obvious reasons. So we tried to basically take some of the pieces of that worksheet that say, these are specific guidelines for the downtown, and put them in this ordinance. So we don't have to have somebody else for that section too, in a totally separate document. So, but other than that, everything else is, like I said, it's wordsmithing and those things. Thank you.
So on the 19th, as far as I know, we have no other agenda.
We will definitely be discussing. Well, depending on
Wondering. Or, actually.
yeah.
Yeah.
And since you will definitely be getting that description there too, then I think we will, obviously the feedback from the group would be helpful, but because I push it out, I think I'd like to motivate the group first. But if it's, maybe that, a couple days after that, sending out, if it's a group, but to the entire group. So scope of work, and that's all kind of fitting together, that, if you folks want to talk about that at the meeting, but, also we can migrate into the actual sort of ideas about the area, because I think the block network idea, the scale, what uses are likely to stay there or change over time, the park and ride, a lot that's in there and stuff.
So if we just procedurally, if we got that scope, we looked at it maybe as a small group, but then on the 19th, we could give a summary of where we were to everybody. Okay, this is what we've done, and this is, and then expand it, and then almost have the collective conversations that we need to have, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So we won't meet tomorrow.
Correct. But if you don't mind, it would be great to meet next Thursday.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's follow up next Thursday.
Yeah.
We'll get our act together.
That way the subcommittee.
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I apologize, we are gonna have others amendments unfortunately this year, so. It definitely for us will largely be on the council side, but we'll try to cycle them in with your regular meetings or there's no request for like special meetings.
So again, for us part-timers, right? It helps us to get on a regimen, right? If we're gonna have something, I think we I've learned that we get it, we meet, we do whatever we gotta do, but keep it, if it just drifts.
Yeah.
And it's this concept that everyone's thinking about, it's not a good use of our brain power, because it doesn't stick,
Agreed,
right?
agreed,
And
agreed.
So it sounds like an exciting meeting on the 19th. I won't be here. I'd be in.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I'm sure you're gonna give us.
It's fine.
well, Rick, you had to leave us alone. It's-
Oh, yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
Whatever you send out, it's all, just taking off.
Yeah.
All right, anything else? Good motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
I'm gonna do roll call again.
Yeah.
Brian,
Yes.
Jen,
I think she left.
She's left.
Holden,
Yes.
Charlie,
Yes.
Yes.
Jack.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Malcolm.